Nicola, it's snowing out there. Why are you wearing a swimming costume? But the people also asked, Noah, this is a desert. Why are you building an ark? So we were told that we can take we don't need to take our uniform seriously for this conference because that is not what this is all about. So I hope you'll forgive this metaphor. And here we have someone at a conference presenting in a swimming costume. And if that is different from different from business as usual, then I don't know what is. So excuse me for the rest of this talk. I hope you managed to focus on the slides. Okay, so these are our protected areas. This is the Garden Route National Park. And it's amazing, it's beautiful, and that is how we've known protected areas through the history of time. But we know that under climate change that they're probably going to underperform. We also know that with increasing number and type of disturbances in an area, they have an increasingly eroding effect on species richness, function, and phylogenetic diversity. And climate change comes into the picture, and it compounds these problems, A, by adding to slow and steady change of species in a particular area, but then it also increases fragmentation, and finally, the extreme events have a particularly significant effect because they not only compound the degradation and fragmentation, but they also take our eye off what we're supposed to be doing as management, and they impact on our funding streams. So they become something that we really can't ignore. Up until now, it's been really hard for managers to deal with this, though, because we know that conservation managers operate in a highly financially constrained system, and when you ask them to think about something that's a little bit uncertain and it's overwhelming, they don't really know what to do. But increasingly, the rate and extremity of these extreme events that we've been experiencing has necessitated that we do something about it. So I think it is important to think about what it is that we want to do so that we can actually take informed decisions. So what we've done is we have started implementing a decision-making framework, which is using scenario-based climate change adaptation within the Resist, Accept, Direct framework, which was been pioneered by the US National Park Service. And what it really does is it helps you to identify the areas that you want to manage, and then to assess how they are vulnerable to climate change, and then work within what we predict to be changing and work out what it is that we want to do about it, and also how our current management stands up to the predicted changes that we're going to experience. So there's us and a number of these conferences with the US National Parks. So Garden Route happened to be one of the first trial parks that we trialed this method with. And we've really been learning as we go, learning by doing. And I think we've come a long way. And I'm really hoping to engage more with this group to actually try and better understand what it is that we want to do in this particular park, because our thinking has evolved quite a bit since the initial workshop. But I'm going to take you through the steps that we did as part of the workshop anyway. And you'll see that I've at least got one follower here who is a small seed of hope in the sea of otherwise lost souls. I don't know where she's following me to, but so what is it that we manage and care about? And I think this is probably where we went most wrong, because like many people before today have mentioned, we don't have the luxury of conducting a scientific experiment. We also have to produce outcomes that are implementable as solutions on the ground kind of immediately. And when we look at what we care about, it's an awful lot of things. And because of this need to produce some kind of outcome across all of these various different things, we haven't had the luxury of being able to hone in and focus. And therefore, I think that has taken away from the outcomes that we're seeing towards the end of this presentation. But anyway, we decided to focus on everything. And the next challenge was to try and distill what is happening to each one of those. And you'll see in Emma's talk where things went wrong further with this. But I think it was an interesting exercise to try and understand what's going on with the Neisner seahorse, what's going on with the community that wants to fish in Tsitsikamma, what's going on with the people who want the estuary mouth opened, what's going on with the people who want the estuary mouth closed. Huge variety of different issues. And then we said, well, what do we actually expect is going to happen in terms of climate change? So the first thing to do is to look at what are your locally important climate variables. So for example, do you worry about changes in rainfall? Do you worry about the amount or the seasonality of the rainfall? Do you worry about changes in temperature or changes in extremes? And what are those extremes in your region? Are they floods? Are they droughts? Is it the duration of extremes, or is it the size of those extreme events? So we went to what was available, which was the CSIR Green Book, and we didn't find all that many uncertainties in the projections for garden root. And as it transpires, it's because they've been really kind and distilled things down into an ensemble model. And what does that ensemble model say? And an ensemble model doesn't actually allow you to explore the length and breadth of the different climate scenarios that are out there. But you will be pleased to know that I have gone to look at the latest IPCC data, and actually I think that the scenarios that and the climate futures that we did evaluate at the particular workshop were actually quite reflective of the types of futures that we might experience here in the garden route. So under most of these models, the rainfall is decreasing. There's a few of the models that predict similar rainfall, but as we know, changes in how that rainfall comes. It might be one big extreme rainfall event as opposed to lots of smaller rainfall events spread throughout the year. And all of the models say that it's going to get warmer. So this is what we actually looked at in our workshop in terms of the climate futures. We considered temperature increase and rainfall amount as our two critical uncertainties. So some of the climate futures were slightly less hot, some of them were much drier, and some of them were similar but with more extremes. So the next thing to do once you've now said to people this is probably what the future is going to look like is going to go and see what this means for your resources. Now I'm not going to bore you with going through each one of the 150 resources and areas of management interest that we identified, but just by way of example, if we take fire and biome boundaries, we know that productivity is different across different biomes. So in a desert biome, for example, you've got very low productivity, and therefore you're not going to have much fire because there's nothing to burn. Whereas in a forest system, you've got very high productivity, but you might also not have much fire because there's too much moisture in the system. But at intermediate levels of productivity, there you're going to have fire. And so what we predicted that is it's really context specific. So if you're in a forest system and it gets much warmer and much drier, then we might see an increase in fire frequency and a switch in the type of vegetation that you'll see. So a switch from a forest system to perhaps a fynbos system. Whereas if you're already in a fynbos or a grassland system and you add more fire, you might actually switch to a low fire system because you don't have enough fuel to burn. And so these were some of the things that we tried to deliberate during our workshop. And once we deliberated across the spectrum of areas of management, the next thing to do is to paint a picture of a scenario. So a scenario is just what happens to your whole society, all your areas of work under a particular climate future. And we had lots of fun doing this in really interactive ways. And what's been interesting is that in subsequent workshops, there have been people that have refused to do this. And I think it's their loss because they thought it was a waste of time. Why are we trying to make people do plays? Why are we trying to be silly like this? But I found that is really what people remembered, and that is what kind of helped them to live into these alternate futures, because how are you going to change the way people think if you don't take them out of their comfort zone? So anyway, after evaluating what happens to all our different resources, we decided that actually we've only got two scenarios, a hot and fiery scenario and a disruption and distress scenario. And under this scenario, I'm just going to give you an illustrative kind of idea of what's happening. Fires are commonplace. The invasive species spread into the forest and the fynbos, further fueling the fires. The peat soils are destroyed. Meanwhile, the tourists are having a ball. Dry beach weather. They're oblivious to the increased risk from fire. They do as they please. They set fire to the veld by accident. It's crazy. And who has to pick up the bill? The tourism industry. There's damaged infrastructure left and right, and it's more and more expensive. The municipalities are going out of their minds because they don't know how to deal with the damaged infrastructure, because it's water infrastructure that gets damaged from floods, but it also gets damaged from drought. All kinds of other pressures coming into play. What I found really interesting was that those are AI-generated images, and they don't even look that bad. But when you look at what's really happening, it's much worse. And yet somehow the tourists continue as if it's a beach day. So, where do we go from here? So the next step ideally was for us to stress test our existing management objectives, and we didn't fully get to this, but the idea is that we assess whether business as usual will get us to where we want to go, whether we need to do a climate retrofit or a complete climate rebuild. And I find this infographic really helpful. So for example, if that's I don't know if there's a pointer, but that's you on your little boat, and your aim is to get to the shore, and you're faced with a headwind. You have a couple of options. You can decide, I am getting to that shore, doesn't matter what, I'm going to get there, and you're going to buy lots more fuel, it's going to be very difficult, it's going to be quite expensive, but maybe you get there. Or you could say, I'm not fighting that. I'm going to let go and accept this headwind that's coming at me, and I'm going to land on these rocks and it's a shaky future. Or you could say, well, there's no ways I'm making that beach, but I still want to make a beach. And so you employ some new technologies like a sail, and you actually get to the beach. And that's what we call resist, accept, or direct. And this is what we try to experiment with. So for example, if you had a goal in the garden route of conserving 50% of the naturally remaining forest extent, you could say, can we meet this goal under climate change? And you might say yes. Then business as usual is good. We just need to make sure that we ramp up our current fire and alien species management and that they are effective. You could ask then, if we can't actually meet this goal, do we want to change the objective? Of course not. Who wants to lose the forest? So then maybe you need some more action, new actions like radical fire suppression or tree planting to get your forest going. Or you could say, look, that is going to cost way too much money. We don't have the manpower. We're going to accept this change, but then what do we do? We need a new goal. We're going to have to manage for fynbos and grassland biodiversity, and we're going to need a whole suite of new actions to go with that. And I think where this process fell short is that while we did get some really good ideas around what we should be doing a little bit differently and where business as usual needed to change, what we didn't have was a goal. So what is our end game? Where are we actually trying to get? How much loss are we willing to accept? What kind of species composition change? And this is an ecological example, but what kind of tourism capacity? Do we want it to look like a sea of people on the beach, or do we still want people sparsely distributed across the beach? Do we want to prevent intertidal zones from being lost? Do we want people starving on our borders? And to really think, what does that mega living landscape actually look like in the garden route, and to really visualize that. So where we are now, we have a bit of a choice. So obviously there's a massive need to quickly get public sector buy-in. So if we know that we're not going to have any water, we actually need to do something about that. So reduce our demand, protect what we have, clean up our waste management, and that needs to start happening really soon. We need to deal with apathy. So we know that through the ages people have survived. But what if it's not a question of survival? How do we actually thrive into the future? And I think what it boils down to is that having those conversations and trying to make people change is uncomfortable, it's unpopular, and it's really time-consuming. But the change is coming whether we want it or not. So the question really is, how deliberate are we going to be in having a say in where the change takes us? And I think that's what we need to look at within this Vision 2040, is what does that mean for the garden route? Set that vision so that we can actually try and get there with all these different vulnerabilities that we're facing. So I just want to thank you, and I've also got a marine picture. With a penguin, just a last example, we can say, we can accept that the penguins are going extinct. That's an accept action. It's going to cost a hell of a lot of money to save the penguin. And if we've thought it through, maybe that's okay. And we use it as a poster child for maybe doing better next time. We could say, we are not letting this penguin go extinct, but then maybe we need to start farming sardines all across the coastline. Or we could say, and this is something that's actually happening already, maybe we need to move where the penguins are in relation to the food resource. So open up areas for the penguins to establish new colonies closer to where their food is. So this is the type of thinking that we want to see, but on a much, much broader scale. So thank you for your time.